Stephen Crane was a master of imagery. Born in Newark, New Jersey, Crane had 15 immediate family members. Another thing that set him apart from a typical modern-day childhood was the fact that he started drinking and smoking at the age of 6. Crane's first major literary influence was his massive family. His father and mother were writers of religious articles, and his 2 brothers were journalists. When he was young, Crane had an interest in the military, and when he finally went to Claveret College in 1888, the military school nurtured his interest in Civil War studies and military training. In military school, Crane was delighted in his experience. While Crane had extensive knowledge in literature and history, he did not do well in the classroom and was barely passing his math and science exams. His alleged hobbies were baseball, fishing, and hunting. It is also believed that Crane disliked his family's religion and did not follow any religions. Before finishing college, Crane quit school to work full-time as a reporter with his brother and part-time for the New York Tribune. He claimed that humanity is a more interesting study. Crane's place with his brother for the New York Tribune was pivotal in Crane developing a sense of being in the moment, and it opened many opportunities for travel to cover world events. His first attempt in 1897 to report on the insurrection in Cuba ended in near disaster. The ship Crane was traveling on sunk. Crane lost all his riches and almost lost his life. In the next attempt, Crane departed to report the Spanish-American War in Cuba, first for the New York World and then for the New York Journal, 2 organizations that his brother introduced to him. When Crane was in Cuba, he experienced war for what it truly was, and he was able to write a book of poems with colorful settings, dramatic action, and perceptive characterization, called War is Kind. Crane's brother securing him a place in corporate America allowed him to develop his imagery greatly. In one of his poems called Do Not Weep, Maiden, for War is Kind, Crane directly drove his imagery from his hands-on experience in the war. He describes the battlefield in his poems like it came directly out of his journal, a field where thousands of corpses lie. He raged at his breast, gulped, and died. The secret of Crane's success was that he played many roles. Crane was a war correspondent, journalist, novelist, short story writer, and poet. A few years back, in the early 1890s, Stephen Crane met Hamlin Garland and William Dean Howells. Garland was a writer that focused on conversing about real problems, and Howells was a critic and author that focused on realism as well. Garland and Howells were essential to Crane's success because they introduced him to the topic of realism, which Crane is most well known for today. One of Crane's most heavily realistic poems is A Man Said to the Universe. In this 5-line poem, Crane strips away all religion, scientific principles, and solely focuses on the relationship between existence and a human. In the poem, the person states a fact: "Sir, I exist," and the universe says that does not create a sense of obligation. Crane contrasts the expectations of humanity with real life and mortality. The whole poem is centralized around that and influenced by Garland and Howells, who introduced Crane to realism and existential writing. Another influence on Crane, and one of his biggest motivations for War is Kind, was when he was younger. Crane pored over old issues of Century magazine. He commented on the magazine saying, "I wonder why it is that some of these fellows don't tell how they felt in those scraps. They spout enough of what they did, but they're as emotionless as rocks." From his awareness of the lack of emotion and feeling in Century magazine, Crane was driven to formulate a literary work that portrayed how it truly felt to be in war. As a result, Crane produced the poem I Explain the Silvered Passing of a Ship at Night in his book War is Kind. In the poem, Crane uses extensive symbolism to convey a soldier's sorrows. In the poem, he talks about the sweep of each sad lost wave and the little cry of man. In those lines, Crane describes how lost in life people felt after the war. He also hints towards a lost loved one through speaking of a lost ship of love. Lastly, Crane also uses the setting of the ocean at night with a lone vessel on it to engulf the poem in sorrow. Overall, it feels like Crane is trying to fill in the gaps of war accounts and experiences all others missed. It is evident that events and interactions in Stephen Crane's life helped him realize his given potential as a writer. His interests in the military had no literary significance until he realized that he did not want to study secondary sources when he entered college because they did not provide ample emotion and experience. As a result, he went and experienced humanity for himself, resulting in him evolving into one of the most emotional and impactful American writers and poets ever.